Yeah. Get pizza on the roof.
Yeah. Okay, I think we're live. Do you want me to get going?
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you.
Oh, super. All right. Well, hi everyone. Thanks for having me. Thanks for inviting me, Laura. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the creative side of Extinction Rebellion, among other things. And I thought it would be good to start off with a bit of my background. I first met Laura probably well over 10 years ago, when I was working with a friend running a women's wear brand, which was all focused on upcycling, good one. And we were using post-industrial and post-consumer textile waste. Everything was made in the UK originally. And these collections were things that we drew out of use of mostly knitwear, mostly repurposed wool. And so a lot of my background's in fashion and textiles, but particularly interested in the environment. And I'd sort of fallen out of the commercial sector, feeling rather kind of exacerbated, I guess, with the state of things. I went and worked with a friend on this label, and post Good One, I went on to work with the charity trade and developed a remade range with them, which was also kind of interesting, slightly different. We had much more sort of scope for different textiles, because I had a factory that was basically that I had access to the whole thing. So I could ask them to save me constantly lots of special materials. So the design work sort of shifted and changed from there. And then once I moved into the Bussy building, where I found Laura again, I was making this technical cycle wear. So this was as a designer, this was like a development for me into, I guess, taking fashion and moving into product. And also producing something which was hopefully facilitate sustainable lifestyle choices by women. I'm a cyclist. I couldn't find anything smart to wear to ride my bike to work. I was always arriving somewhere on a bike going, oh, don't look at me, I've just arrived on my bike. It's not a very good look when you're freelancing in the fashion industry. And so all of this kind of background it led me through, alongside teaching and sustainability and fashion and ethics, I guess, to be constantly sort of paying quite close attention to the environmental context, and very well aware of how bad that was. And also, I guess one thing that's like kind of interesting about this work is that I took a lot of inspiration in some ways from looking at design from many different points of view, or many different sort of aspects, because of working in startups, working with very little money, often working with not enough resource. And a lot of that takes a lot of innovation and creativity. And there's lots of aspects of startup theory and stuff, which I think has helped in some ways with my work in campaigning and helping to set up Extinction Rebellion. So we launched XR only in 2018, which feels like not very long ago. It feels like that's about 20 years ago to me, but actually it's not. And we launched it with this declaration of rebellion. I felt quite bold at the time that we were going around saying we're going into open, non-violent resistance and rebellion against the government for their criminal inaction on the climate and ecological emergency. And we were trying to work iteratively before. So I was part of a group called Rising Up, which was a decentralized network of activists in the UK who were basically testing out lots of different campaign tactics, very interested in civil disobedience and non-violence and direct action. And we did a lot of experimentation before we launched XR. So, repeated road blockades and seeing how long you can stay in the road for, trying different types of swarming tactics, which means you sort of go on and off the road, and you could avoid arrest in that way, because you would only block for a very short amount of time and then leave. We actually started out, myself and a few others, blocking roads at like rush hour for like 10 minutes, and then we would go and have a picnic afterwards. calm down. Okay, we did it for 10 minutes. And then we would go back a fortnight later and do it again. And at that time, it felt a bit like practice flexing a muscle almost, of getting used to the idea of doing things which aren't always super easy to do, because you know, a lot of us are in this in order to try and prevent disruption, in order to try and prevent harm, and it's quite a barrier actually just to get over in terms of civil disobedience, to make yourself go and glue yourself to the thing, or to make yourself go and throw the paint at the wall. It's not you know, it's not just something that's like a big pile of fun. Basically, it can be very daunting, and it takes a lot of kind of practice and support and stuff to get it moving. And so we worked quite iteratively with all this different stuff, and the image you can see is from when we shut down 5 bridges at once, which again was, you know, it's a bit of an experiment. We weren't really sure whether or not we could pull it off. And I was astonished on the first day of declaration how many people showed up, because I usually would go to an action and think, oh, I hope there's more than 12 people. And so when there was thousands of people, I was very shocked. Similarly with the bridges, I was very, very shocked that we actually did close 5 bridges with thousands of people. And all of this was organized with a kind of momentum-driven organizing tactics. So you set the system up so that you can have the trainers train the trainers, and they train more trainers, and you sort of have this rolling, growing membership of people who are all sort of passing on information and education about how things work. And also what we tried to root ourselves in, I guess, is like thinking about things iteratively, and as I sort of helped to set up the design department, how you have like actions in cycles. So you go out and you do, and then you reflect and you learn, and then you go out and do again, and then you reflect, and then you learn, and then you redesign. So in lots of ways, there's so much kind of design practice baked into the whole movement. We've got these 10 principles and values, and basically it means that anyone who wants to take action in the name of Extinction Rebellion can. We don't have like a membership, you don't have to pay or sign up or anything like that. You do have to adhere to these 10 principles and values. You can find them on the website, and they include some of the things you can see on the screen. We openly challenge ourselves. You know, it's pushing beyond your comfort zone. We're committed to that collectively. We are valuing, reflecting, and learning, hopefully. We're committed completely to non-violence. And one quite important one is that we avoid blaming and shaming. And I think that's also, you know, it can be challenging when you need to have conversations about accountability, and making sure that people know how to deal with issues. But at the same time, avoiding blaming and shaming is completely kind of the antithesis of the sort of broader culture, I think, that we're swimming in. And it's very easy to watch protesters find themselves in a position of kind of pure opposition, rather than being for something. You know, you definitely know what you're against. You definitely know who you're against, and we tried to avoid that. And I hope that it's been at least something that's offered a different kind of flavor, I guess, to the work than a lot of the work on the left that's gone before. So that was really, really intentional. And having this model means that it's very easy for it to expand, which I think is, you know, a lot of the design of the system is what made it possible for the movement to spread to, I don't know, over 70 countries in about a year and a bit, because it's quite a small set of resources that people can be handed over. Here's how you do it. Here's some information. Here's a list of things that we stick to. Here's a little pack to show you how to make the flag, or here's the artworks, and we could send them out. From a design position as well, I think that when my friend Clive said he was making us a font, at the beginning I felt it was a bit unnecessary, and perhaps he was making a huge amount of work for himself in the context of putting together the design identity and the design program. And actually I think having our own font has been the most wonderful aspect of the design work, because everyone in the world can write something in that font in their own language, and it looks and it feels with a certain color on the background just like it belongs to the movement. So it's had a very big uniting impact, I guess. and in that way, making a design program that you share, that you very quickly give away, and encourage everybody to use all of the graphic assets and the color schemes and all of the posters and the models inside it, was also a really, really quick way for us to do this decentralizing of the work. So we create something, and in the kind of opposite way to what you would normally do with a kind of branding gig, you just give it away as quickly as possible and tell people to make their own stuff. And we got 3 demands, which you may have heard before. The first one is to tell the truth. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, that's still not happened. The telling the truth demand is kind of at the government, but it's also aimed at institutions. It's also aimed at ourselves, partly. I think in terms of people facing up to the truth about the climate crisis and about the biodiversity crisis, there was nothing that I could see in the kind of civil society space, let's say, that is really being honest with the public about how much risk they're at and how much risk their kids are at, how much risk the people in the global south are already at. The urgency wasn't really there. And so one of the first things that we did was drop a 50-metre long banner off the side of Westminster Bridge that said, "Climate change, we're fucked." And it was really an experiment with language, and in saying, like, people are not telling the public the real story here, and things are going to unfold really very quickly. I think what this also means, for me at least, is when you tap into the emotion of what it feels like to acknowledge where we're at, you know, it hurts. And there also was an abject kind of lack of emotion. And we felt at the beginning that it was important to give people permission to be in grief, and to talk about how it really felt. And so there's a really a very emotional aspect to the work as well. And we tried to, in some ways, design that in as well. And then Act Now is the second demand. So we demand for carbon neutrality by 2025, and to halt and reverse biodiversity loss by the same time. A lot of people have said to us that that's not realistic, but we weren't set up to do things that are realistic. We were set up to do things that were necessary. And this, I'm afraid, is what the science suggests would be the course of action, particularly for very wealthy countries like ours. And so coming from the UK and speaking from our context, that's what we said. And we used to have this kind of early mantra, I guess, of like, tell the truth and then act as if the truth is real. We're trying to act in accordance with the way that you might decide to behave if you really took to heart and believed that we're in the situation that we're actually in. And then the third demand is for a citizens' assembly. It's quite a well-documented political mechanism, if you like. I actually think it's very moderate. I think it's very reasonable. The idea of inviting participation from ordinary citizens into politics in order to help society to collectively come to agreements about some very, very difficult decisions that need to be made and what to do about the situation that we've found ourselves in. And I think this third demand is one of the least understood and the most important aspects of Extinction Rebellion. It means that you have ordinary people with ordinary values taking decisions. So those people are categorically kind of capable of doing something different than what lobbied politicians or corrupt politicians or politicians with vested interests are able to do. So the idea is to build a capacity within the political system that can make better decisions, because we're seeing that the system we've got at the moment, I don't think it can do what's needed without a major shift. And I guess, you know, in terms of making an assembly a reality, you would see a microcosm of the nation, so everybody gets represented, and that would mean that the majority of people in the assembly would be from the majority groups in the public demographically. So working class people, the 1% would get one seat, you would have a gender balance that's reflective of the nation. I do think even just it would be revolutionary to have that many women involved in politics, to have that many people represented from different faith backgrounds, with different abilities, with blah, blah, blah. The rules can go on and on. You make the rules however you want, and then you set the randomization to rules. And the root of citizens' assemblies is a process called sortition, which is the random selection process. And that actually hails back to ancient Athenian democracy, where it was every citizen's role. It actually wasn't, because it wasn't women and it wasn't poor people. But the idea was that it was every citizen's role to be available to be part of the democratic process. So a bit like a jury system, really. Everybody has agency in theory and can be represented in the political system. So that's the third demand. This is quite an iconic image, I guess, now of the boat. And we came up with this idea for the boat and for all the other sites that happened in the April Rebellion, in collaboration with loads of different activists. And I guess the boat kind of out of water became a bit of a sort of icon that was copied and replicated around the world. And this one, Tell the Truth, this was on Oxford Circus, so we parked it up right near the BBC, basically, and that was to bring attention to that demand. We also, at the same time, closed Waterloo Bridge and put 47 trees on there to turn it into the Garden Bridge. We also had people at Marble Arch who were kind of holding a campsite for the rebellion, and then we had a space held in Parliament Square which was dedicated to the politics and to citizens politics and citizens assemblies. And I guess what I found fascinating about this beginning of the movement was how a lot of the thinking from Rising Up had really helped us to think in terms of design through how we're going to do the work. And so we knew, for example, that we wanted to use a symbol. When we came up with the name Extinction Rebellion, I already knew there was this symbol called the Extinction symbol, and it's not ours. It's quite a nice problem to have that it's not ours, actually. It belongs to an artist who created it and loaned it to us. I think they were also actually quite shocked about what happened after they agreed to that. But we wanted to be able to communicate with icons and without always needing to use words and language. We wanted to make it multicolored, so that's why you see the color palette on the flags and stuff. We wanted it not to be like a green movement or an orange movement or whatever, like you often have in politics, that you're restricted by color. We chose all these kind of in-between colors to try and open it even further so that we could feel that we were leading into an intersectional kind of space with the design, but without making it into like a rainbow and using lots of primary colors. And then we saw the sort of rolling out of all of this stuff all around the world. And so on the left, you can see the boat in New York, I think it is, and lots of people replicating various different types of actions in all different countries. And this sort of kicked off really, really quickly. But you can see how all over the world, people sort of clearly acting in unison. You can feel the sort of the solidarity and the connection through like the look and feel, if you like. And one of the things that we worked on in Rising Up, which was to do with action design, was thinking about things that are cheap and low entry. And so a lot of work on kind of non-violent direct action can often involve, like this guy, he's got a harness, he's climbed up a street lamppost. Fine, that's cool, and we like people that do these brave things, but also in terms of lowering the barriers to entry, it really doesn't take a huge amount of training to glue your hand to your friend whilst you're sat in the road, or it really doesn't take you very much money or special training to be able to take a can of spray chalk and spray paint that on the side of a window, for example. And so we wanted to create these kind of action design principles that were like replicable and simple, and lots of people could do them. And you might have seen just the other week, there was a mass rollout in the UK of Rebellion of One, and that concept's travelled also around the world quite quickly. So lone protesters, that was kind of inspired off the back of the COVID crisis, and people needing to think about innovative ways that they could still go out and make a noise as part of our campaign, but without creating as much mass disruption and without needing to do such kind of mass gatherings, I guess. We came up with this idea quite early on in the art department that we wanted it to be a do it together movement and not a DIY movement. So it's all about the collaboration and about people making things together. So one of the aspects that I think was very successful was doing a lot of fly posting. It's a really fun kind of like first disobedient thing to do. There's some risk of arrest depending on where you are, but most people very successfully can go out and splash a load of posters around with their local group. It's a great way to get people going. And it also, the more that you do it, the bigger the movement looks. So we were very aware from other movements of the past that if you can go out and make a big creative display on the streets overnight in lots of parts of the city, and everyone goes, oh, what's that? Then you appear potentially much bigger than you are. And that's a really, really useful tactic that we used right at the beginning. And the other thing that we worked on quite hard at the start was like wearable stuff. So that was kind of my patch. And myself and a friend, Miles, who did a lot of the drawings, worked on these print blocks that you can see on the right-hand side, so that people could have ink and rollers and wooden blocks or 3D printed blocks. And you could print things in situ. So whilst we were holding a space in the street, a disobedient or a rebellious space, people could make their own merchandise. And we wanted to make the merchandise route a course that requires action, basically. So you can't buy the t-shirt, you have to make it yourself, and you have to bring something that you already own, and then you can stamp it or you can pin patches on it, and it's all free. You can donate if you want, but it was really important to us that it was kind of merchandise without new materials and merchandise without an exchange of any money. And obviously I'm really proud of the fashion team, because one of the early things that we did was write to the British Fashion Council and say, we're going to come and block the roads outside so that Fashion Week is disrupted. You wouldn't know if you go to London Fashion Week, really, that the planet is in such a dire state of emergency. I think post-COVID, things are looking really quite different. But at this time, at the beginning, we felt it was really, really important to go and confront the industry in the place where I guess the most kind of aspirational people, attend all these shows, and some very, very powerful people, do the rounds at Fashion Week. And so we put on these protests, and it sort of evolved into its own aesthetic, which was really beautiful. I think it's had a huge impact on the industry at large, which is really exciting, because it's resulted in some extraordinary conversations. And also I know that a lot of designers are talking now about how badly they think that we need to degrow the fashion industry. And I think that's fabulous that we're starting, because nobody that I've met really kind of knows how to start that or where to have that conversation, despite the fact that they might know that at some time they're going to have to tell their shareholders, look, we can't carry on growing, this isn't working, it's not going to be okay. So hopefully this is all sort of like shaken things up and begun that dialogue. So basically the things that we worked on really hard from my position, and bear in mind there were many, many people who founded this movement with me and did a huge amount of work in all different aspects, but was to be making the spaces beautiful, to be dressing the body and making sure that people could take the protest with them. So not just a placard, but things that you wear and things that you keep, things that you wear when you're on the bus or on the way home that you have more conversations about. making spaces non-violent. I think there's something about like the aesthetic that we tried to create, including large size banners that just say non-violent, placards that say non-violent. So having that reminder all the time in the space, that's kind of the purpose of why we built the aesthetic and the look and feel, partly the way that we did. And also to be able to communicate with people through protest kind of and performance. I think the other thing that people have kind of, a lot of people have seen these red people before, and they became a kind of, you know, an iconic thing for people to take photographs of. But what's crucial about this piece of performance is that they're silent, and they bring a kind of soothing, silent channel of energy through the space. And it's amazing how that lowers the energy. If you're going to go out and be obstructive and get in people's way and piss people off, it makes sense to try and engineer stuff on the ground so that you can help to de-escalate. We always have non-violent communicators on the ground, de-escalation teams, and these people taking these performances, which I think just helps to like bring any difficult energy down, and keep our dedication to non-violence, which I'm so proud of the movement for its commitment to that and the discipline. And so at this point, this is my latest mantra in the spirit of Paris 1968. And I think particularly in our country and other rich countries in the global north or the west, or however you want to describe that, we really have a huge responsibility to take this very, very seriously and get as much action as we can, as quickly as we can, because time's really, really very late in the day. And I guess I'm aware that like a lot of the people who come to this event have got very close ties with people who will be way more on the front line than we are, who will be living through some of the difficult impacts already, and perhaps anticipating much more difficult impacts to themselves or their business or their families, their loved ones, as a result of changes in our biosphere and our climate, and also whatever the relevant politics. And so I guess I wanted to close by just saying that I think the most important thing that we can do from here to help people there is really to get change here, and really to get change from our government, really to demand that things move. And so for that, I wanted to just give a little bit of a shout out to all of the people that you could support, including XR, including your local XR groups, but also Fridays for Future groups, also Extinction Rebellion Youth and any other youth climate movements. There's plenty to choose from, whoever you want to support, and also to just invite you to go and look up the Climate and Ecological Emergency Bill, which is a political bill which has been drafted with some people from Extinction Rebellion, but not just, with lots of other people as well. We've already got, I think, over 100 MPs have signed up to it, which I find quite remarkable. I mean, it's nowhere near enough. We're a long way away from it being possible to get that through, but it's really important to me that we have this kind of feasible piece of environmental legislation on the table as an offering to say, look, we're not just here to make a scene, but we have a very viable route forwards with which we think this stuff can get addressed, and the public, importantly, can be brought with you, because there's some really full-on stuff that needs to happen, and it really, really needs the public and at large to agree that that this is what's necessary, and that we've got to pull together basically and make it work. So I'll just leave it there, and I'm happy to sit and take any questions or have a chat with you guys.
Oh my goodness, Claire, thank you so much. What a way to end today. I just feel so inspired, and that was absolutely brilliant. And yeah, cool. Who's got questions? I feel like, okay. Question from Pam. What is the most effective thing individuals can do to help with climate change? Stop flying, stop driving, go vegan, or boycott companies, or all of them. Well, no, you stand up for one.
Well, I think probably there's a handful. I don't ever know the exact like figures, but massive difference if you go vegan, actually. And I'm try to be vegan and I don't always manage it. I'm not good enough. But it's a very high impact. Another thing is changing where your electricity comes from, your energy provider, insulating your home. I mean, it's an absolute no-brainer. It's actually insanity that the government have still not organised a mass insulation project on the UK, because people have tried for many years to get them to buy, and often a lot of these decisions end up like stopped at the Treasury point where they say no, we're not going to pay for that. But it's massive amount of job creation if we do actually start to take this crisis seriously, which is what I think people don't often hear about that much. Not flying is quite easy. I've not flown for quite a few years, and I guess moving your money and not watching who you bank with. A massive amount of fossil fuel investment is running through the City of London, and most of the high street banks are implicated very, very badly in how they distribute investment still. There's almost nobody in the banking sector who's running anything in line with expecting to meet their Paris commitments and all of that. So follow the money, I guess, is quite a major one.
Thank you. I've got 5 new messages. I'm not keeping up. Christina said the biggest impact you can possibly have is to campaign. Vicky has said, read how bad are bananas, the carbon footprint of everything. And it answers all these questions. Fantastic, thank you. Does anybody, Christine, did you want to ask a question?
I'd just like to say something.
Yeah.
I've been involved with my local BAFTS XR group, and I was actually involved in the Oxford Circus thing as well in March 19, which was really good, actually. But 2 things I take away from working with BAFTS XR is how much time they spend on just campaigning on local issues. And secondly, how incredibly effective they are. So it's not about gluing yourself to a building. It's not about blocking a road. It's about badgering councillors and the council and objecting to this and protesting against that. And the impact that you can have just with a handful of local people in stopping a certain planning application from happening and, avoiding 250,000 tons of carbon emissions, just like that, which I could never manage by going vegan or by, anything else. So the impact that you can have in reduction of emissions is probably the biggest by just starting to campaign. That was what I take away from it. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Christine. I also think it's really important for people to remember that there have been some wins for XR. I think like sometimes people feel like, oh, well, we haven't won and we haven't got our demands, and Parliament declared an emergency, but then they did absolutely nothing, and what does that all mean? And actually I think successes against coal mines, against Bristol City Airport, there's many sort of localized wins that have happened, and I think the broader left are not so good at celebrating themselves, are they, or like their successes? And there's a thing that Rebecca Solnit writes about very beautifully, I think, which is that it's very hard to celebrate something that doesn't happen. So like the roads campaigning that happened in the 90s in this country was actually hugely successful because some of the roads got made, but most of them didn't. But how do you celebrate something that didn't happen? That's really like quite a big challenge, for things when you're trying to sort of prevent harm, when you're trying to prevent deforestation, or when you're trying to stop things from getting like destroyed, or new big infrastructure from getting built, it's very difficult for us to celebrate those things. But I think we have to think quite carefully about how we try to do that, because as you say, there's lots of great stuff that's happened, and I often think that we really don't manage to celebrate nearly enough.
Yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it? Vicky, have you got a question?
Yeah, I think, and I wonder how many other people will have the same thought. I'm a member of my local XR group. I do stuff for XR, I do stuff for the shop, I do stuff on Facebook sort of personally, you know, tackling stuff on climate change issues. But the shop and the XR are two entirely separate parts of my life. And I think partly because the shop is part of a charity and not everyone on the board is behind the idea, but actually, how do we marry the kind of activism part and the selling stuff part? Because we're all trying to sell stuff, and I know that if I did more XR kind of stuff in the shop, people, I mean, I've handed out leaflets on the street, and I know that, you know, it's not popular. People think you're an idiot. So it's just like how to, I really want to get more green in and more engage people more in the shop. But it's just it's this kind of a disconnect, if you see what I mean. I don't know whether you have an answer for that.
Yeah.
Anyone else has thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's really challenging. And at the beginning, we talked quite a lot about how we were trying to represent people through the look and the feel. And I know that like quite a lot of people at certain points have focused very much on their profession and coming out in their nurse's outfit or their doctor's outfit or their scientist lab coat or whatever it is, and wearing signs that say I'm a teacher, or, you know, I'm a lawyer, I'm a doctor, I'm an engineer, I'm a whatever. And I think sometimes when we sort of manage to really land things in that way, then it becomes easier for people to see the sort of humanity in the individual, and not just receive the, I don't know what the word is, the feeling that some people get when they go, oh no, that's, you see what you're like, I'm not like you. You know what I mean? And I can imagine are you in Harrogate? Yeah, I can imagine that's a tough audience. I used to live in the northeast, and there's definitely some places where I think this stuff flies, and there's some places where it's like really quite a hard sell, depending on the sort of local area and what people are like. I mean, I think also the other thing that's interesting though about XR is that it can be quite amorphous, you know, so you can find yourself in a space where like everybody's in like outdoor gear and they're talking about lock-ons, and you know they're getting ready to do some quite like hardcore actions. You can also find yourself in a room you know, talking to XR families, and maybe they're arranging like to go out and set up a space for kids, you know, where it has to be safe and secure, and you know, and in a different location. And so I don't know, I think getting people for one-on-one chats is probably, it's a very long, slow kind of process. But often I think individual connection is the only way. If people are sort of have an aversion to you, the way to get through that is like on one-on-ones. So maybe you want to do a little like house meetings, maybe when people start to feel a bit more safe to open their houses or their gardens up and stuff.
Well, I think it's not so much that, it's the how I do stuff in the shop, really, how I get these kind of messages over in a shop context, you know, without putting people off.
So Vicky runs a lovely and very small fair trade shop in Harrogate, in the centre of Harrogate, that sells only fair trade products. So and and it's artisan products. It's products made by people who have been most badly affected by climate crisis. It's as everybody here is working with those people. I think it's difficult. It's complex. But I think the whole thing is very complex, and I think that's why I think XR. This is why I wanted Claire to speak as well, because I think that one of the things that XR does really well is it makes it about people, and that's all people. And I think just what Claire was just saying about I'm a doctor, I'm a nurse, I'm an engineer, whatever. It's like, and the Citizens Assembly thing, where it's like, it's having people who represent all walks of life. And actually what we're trying to do is represent the people who don't have a voice in many other platforms. I know that whenever I speak to people who I work with, they just go, they're excited that people are knowing, and this came up with what Suzanne was saying this morning, like when you see our beautiful things, you're seeing us. I don't know if that's anyway helpful. I feel like Claire's got more wisdom on this than I have.
Well, I guess I could just say that when we did the boycott, the fashion boycott, that was obviously something that people had felt a little bit surprised by, I think, because it was so full on. You know, there wasn't really anyone else in the fashion campaign space that was going to go out and say, stop shopping for a year. I got approached by somebody who was working for Oxfam that summer campaigning at a festival, and they said, would you consider not buying any new clothes for a month? And I was like, I'm already not buying any for a whole year, babe. It sort of feels like quite an affront, I think, to people, and they assumed that it was going to have some kind of like massive impact. I really don't think that the high street felt the hit from our boycott campaign. Do you know what I mean, in terms of actual sales? But the point was to make a big noise about that, and then I think, you know, what the girls have been working on since, who've done a lot of that work on the boycott campaign, is going into like being really scrutinizing who's paying the workers and not paying the workers in COVID. How are people being cared for or not cared for in terms of their like supply chains? Who can you hold to account? How can you look at holding the feet to the fire kind of thing of the people who are not doing the work in the proper way? So there might be, depending on your product base, like there might be something more that you can do that campaigns at the mainstream of that particular space, so you make it like more specific on your sort of product areas and stuff that you specialize in, which might help make it a little bit more sense to your customer base and to the average person. Do you know what I mean? So that might be one way that you could also examine your own supply chains and make sure that you're doing like the best job that you can of communicating them and showing the people behind the products. Because I think often there's a fashion researcher called Kate Fletcher, and she did a beautiful talk where she said, you know, people say we're materialistic, but we're not materialistic enough in some ways, because we don't actually appreciate or care about the things that we've actually got. And so it's trying to engage people in that way and say, like, maybe you should cherish these things more, maybe you should love the people in the supply chain more. And I know from being a designer who does that kind of work with a complicated supply chain, which is made even more difficult by using like old rubbish and materials that are an absolute nightmare to source, that it's huge work, like documenting and showing supply chains. Do you know what I mean? But I think when people understand how many hands things have gone through and how much human labor is involved in like the stuff that they get, which seems to just sort of magically appear in the UK from out of nowhere, you know, people are so detached from the materiality of what they've got and what they buy. So perhaps that's also sort of something that you could focus on more, which would help you then to speak about the industry at large and the impacts and stuff with a bit more detail. That might be a softer way for you to approach it.
Yeah, thank you.
Oh, you're on mute, Laura.
Sorry, it's the end of this is the end of my technical everything. I think we probably need to draw it to a close. We've got a couple of messages saying this has been incredibly informative, inspiring. Claire, thank you very much. So, and it really has. Thank you so much for coming this evening. It's been brilliant. So I just want to say, yeah, thank you. Oh, is everybody back in the same? Are we all in the same room now?